Welcome to Good Goodbyes, the Funeral Facts podcast. We are really glad you found us. In this podcast, me, Simon, a funeral director,
and me, Tina, I'm an independent celebrant.
We discuss all things funeral in an informal space to demystify what happens when we say goodbye.
Based on your questions and queries, Si and myself are two industry professionals that are going to chat through the hows, whats and wherefores. We actively work in the funeral industry in Devon in the UK. So, we hope you enjoy the episode ahead. Welcome to Good Goodbyes. Hello listeners, welcome to Good Goodbyes. This is Tina and today I have a guest with me, Philip. I'm going to ask Philip to introduce himself. Philip, why are you here today and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good morning. My name is Philip Nieuwoudt, and I have got a tree nursery in Devon where we grow beautifully sort of sculpted, slightly mature trees with an impact. And I am on this podcast because it's a really nice thing to do for people to plant a tree after somebody has died. I always do it when people close to me have died. And I think it's a really great thing because we need more trees. And also when you see that tree grow and develop, then you will always think of that person. So that's why I thought it'd be good to join you.
Yeah, fantastic. And I agree with everything you said, really. I think there's something very magical about having something living after something, after a death has happened. And I think there's something quite wonderful about the magic of trees, really, and all the very variety of trees. So I thought it'd be really good to talk about a number of things about them, really, because I know our listeners will be really curious, Philip. So when you say like your trees are mature, how old does a tree have to be? If you don't know much about trees and you're listening to this, how old does a tree have to be until it's kind of a mature sized tree?
We use the term mature in our industry for something that's big enough to make an impact on a garden design. So, because if you buy a really small little whip, you won't see that, and not for many years. So our trees are most probably sort of between 8 years on the faster growing varieties, like birches and, hawthorns and crab apples, things like that. And then on the older varieties, you're most probably talking more up towards 15 sort of up to 20 years time. So it's a very slow process for us to get trees ready. But like I said, with some of the faster growing varieties, we can get them ready, because we plant them when they're about 3 to 4 years old, and then we'll keep them for another 4 years. So we're talking about sort of 7-8 years.
Yeah.
Before they're big enough to be, to be noticed in a garden design. But obviously trees keep growing. So, we can't, when a tree gets too big, you can't fit it on a truck. You can't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The roots get too big and all that. So there's a certain cutoff point. But, saying that, there's nurseries in Europe that sell trees that are sort of 50, 70, 80 years old.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? Yeah. And I love there's a generous quote, isn't there, about planting a tree. A generous person is a person who plants a tree that they won't get to sit under the shade of. And I think there's something quite magical about that idea of giving on beyond our own lives as well when we plant trees. It's just a wonderful idea. So if people are choosing trees in relation to wanting to remember somebody, or maybe even sprinkling ashes beneath them, is there anything we ought to be thinking about ashes and trees?
No, I mean, we put, if you don't mind me saying, we put bone meal on trees. So, it's not any different to that. That's not a problem at all. It's actually quite good for the tree because we become so clean and cleanliness aware in our whole environment, not leaving dead animals on the land and things like that. I've got a field that we're rewilding, and that's where I planted most of my sort of memorial trees for people. Is that, having sort of decaying matter or anything like that, not that you'd leave obviously a person, but I'm talking about animals and stuff. It's good for the environment, it's good for the soil. So no, that's not a problem at all. It's more about choosing the right kind of tree, and I think this is maybe where you're going with this.
Yeah, it is really, because I mean, there's a couple of different ways you can celebrate people with trees, and I thought it'd be lovely to talk about the kind of trees. Interestingly, some of the trees that you've spoken about already, I've got in my garden, which feels really special, and they weren't my husband's mum, I suppose she would be my mother-in-law. Yeah. She, trying to think who she was then. I've got a tree in my garden that reminds me of her. And she was always she's a bit of a not an easygoing person. So I wanted to choose a tree that kind of like was a bit of her, really. So I think that it's quite interesting.
So which tree did you pick?
I picked a hawthorn because...
Oh, there we go. I was just thinking hawthorn, but prickly.
Yeah, because she was a little bit prickly at times, but they're also very beautiful.
They're very beautiful. They're my favourite trees. They're very
underestimated tree, aren't they? No, that's all I was going to say. They're a bit underestimated.
Yeah, they're very underestimated, and I like them because... Well, they sort of reminded me, I'm from South Africa, it reminded me about the thorny acacia trees from South Africa. So I really like thorns. And when I started the tree nursery, I ran, the nursery I used to work at, my old boss, the list of trees that I was growing, and I put hawthorns on there. And he said, "You're never going to sell hawthorns. Nobody's going to buy hawthorns." And now we can't grow them fast enough because... So we sort of dethorn them on the stems and stuff where people are, and then just leave it in the canopy. And they're beautiful little trees. They flower, they fruit, they're good for pollinators, they're good for biodiversity. And they were growing to a tree in our time. Like I was saying, that there's some hawthorns up on Dartmoor that's 650 years old, those big old gnarly ones. They figured out. So they can live for a long, long time, but they grow fairly quickly into the size that they're going to be. And that's what I really like about them. So you're saying you're planting a tree for somebody else to sit under the shade. Then if you want to sit underneath a hawthorn, but we grow them so that you can, and they are absolutely beautiful. But yeah, they're very good for for that kind of personality. I planted a couple of trees for people now, and every time I try and think, the personality. So I planted a hawthorn for a friend of mine that died of breast cancer, and it flowers on her birthday. It's a pink flowering hawthorn called Protegus crimson cloud, and it's just and it just gets covered in these beautiful pink flowers around her birthday. And yeah, maybe she was also a bit prickly. But it's just because it's one of my favorite trees. And the other one was my mother-in-law. I planted a yew tree because it's poisonous.
I know, Philip, there'll be people listening to this podcast going, yep, I can identify with that.
No, I mean, it was fine. I really, really like my mother-in-law, but I just thought it was tongue-in-cheek, sort of, that whole joke about the mother-in-law being a bit difficult. So I thought that was quite funny. And when me and my father-in-law walk past the tree, he always goes, good morning, Mrs., when we walk past. So I quite like it. And then when my dad died, I planted a purple peach because he was quite cantankerous. So he had quite a dark cantankerous side to his personality, and I chose the one with the darkest, blackest leaves. So again, that's sort of. But then when it grows up in spring, there's this really beautiful red new growth around it. But most of the time, it's quite cantankerous, and I also thought that was quite funny, just to
very nice.
Bring out that side in him. Or remember that side of him, because people seem to forget those things.
You're saying something quite interesting, actually, because when I develop funerals with people, what I often find is that families imagine or think that they have to just tell the side about the person that's all about the great things about them. And we all have different parts to our character, and sometimes it's nice to hear the things that you know that were tricky about them, or their kind of characteristics that made us think, oh, for goodness sake. And I was recently talking to somebody, and they were saying, oh, you know, he was amazing in so many ways. He had so many, you know, generosities of spirit. He'd kind of make anything for you out of his garage. I said, he sounds angelic, and they were like, well, then again. So what was the downside? And they were like, well, he never put his hand in his pocket. So basically, if you went, they said he would be the first in the pub and the last to the bar.
we all know those people.
Yeah, and the minute they said that, they just relaxed and they started talking about the whole of him. And I love what you're saying about the fact that, you know, let's celebrate everything about somebody. You know, and I've got a birch in my garden as well. I've only got the 2 trees because I haven't got a lot of space, but the birch just reminds me, it's very dancey, and it reminds me of my own mum who wasn't a dancer but loved music and loved the idea of being a dancer. So, you know, that works.
Yeah, they're very sort of elegant. I was just thinking about the birches. I was sort of thinking what other personalities can go with trees, and birches came to mind because they've got that beautiful sort of swinging, you know, sort of elegance to them, especially the native one, the Betula pendula, which droops right with age, and you get that beautiful sort of soft branches just swaying in the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah, very beautiful.
So I think what probably people could benefit from is if they are in a place where they're thinking of a tree for somebody, then they could certainly get in touch with someone like yourself, Luke, couldn't they? Who knows a lot about trees and talk about their person. And then, you know so much about trees, you could kind of almost match them or give them more ideas than most of us would just probably go for a couple of standard things because we wouldn't know about the choice, really.
Yeah, that is the thing. I mean, and that's what I was trying to bring out with, you know, the trees that I picked for, you know, just for the people that died. Because there are so many different trees, you know, you've got, you know, so many different trees, but so many different sort of characteristics and personalities, in a way, personality traits that you can link up to, you know, most people you could find a tree for. You know, we grow about 100 different varieties. And so, you know, there's 100 different choices just there. But I mean, I had to select, you know, very selective, you know, because the nursery isn't very big. So I had to select, you know, trees that would grow down here in Devon and stuff like that. And then I wanted interest for all seasons, you know, flowers, fruit, autumn color, shape, you know, bark, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, there's so many different characteristics to look for. But when you start looking into trees, and I think that's an amazing thing about this. So not only are you thinking about your loved one and thinking about their personality, not just thinking about the good stuff, thinking about the whole of them, like you said, which I quite like that term. But you also then start getting to know trees a little bit more. So that's a nice little benefit, isn't it? Because most people just think, I mean, most people don't notice trees, I've realized, the way that I do. But you obviously, because you're talking about them. But just becoming a bit more aware about different trees, different shapes, different, you know, textures, leaf shapes, you know. I mean, when people come to the nursery first, I always say, so what do you visualize? Draw the picture of the tree that you want, because there's so many different shapes of trees that, you know, then I can direct them in, you know, in some direction, because you know, if you just come and say I want a tree, it's a very difficult thing to.
Yeah, no, that feels like a really helpful start, doesn't it? You know, what do they want their tree to look like? What kind of shape? What sort of shape? I think you're right about how we've lost touch with some of our nature, and I think a lot of us are trying to reconnect with that. And you know, I will often go walking and come upon trees, and my daughter, who's 21, will say, "What's that, Mum?" And I'm like, "I do not know. We need to find out what that kind of tree that is."
You can just make it up. But she wouldn't know. You could say anything.
I know. I could amuse her with Latin names, couldn't I? I don't
now with Google, if we're allowed to say that, But there's so many apps now that you can just take a picture and then it'll tell you what tree it is.
Absolutely,
It's
there are,
so
aren't
easy.
they? Yeah.
It's so easy to identify trees these days. And yeah, it's just if it means people can get to become a bit more aware of the natural environment and trees around them, that's also a good thing, isn't it?
It is. And trees are a lasting symbol of life. I think there's a longevity to trees that goes beyond our lifetime for many of us. I mean, people have a lot of emotional attachment to trees as well. I was watching the programme the other day here in the UK about the sycamore gap tree that was felled. And the emotional outpouring from people, the distress that people felt because an old ancient tree had been felled. So they are important to us.
Definitely. I mean, I know exactly where I was driving when I heard that. It was like somebody stabbed a dagger into my chest.
Yeah.
I could not believe it.
Yeah.
And the sort of mindlessness of it was what made it even worse, isn't it? It was done as a kind of a sick joke. But the amazing thing about that is it's making me feel slightly emotional just talking about it. Is that the outpour of feelings and grief and complete. I mean, I don't know all the words that can describe that came out from that. I think it was absolutely incredible, and not from just here, from all over the world, because I mean that was a tree that many people, there was in some famous film, and
that's right.
So
it was in a Robin Hood film, and it was
so people all over the world felt like this, and I think for me that was an amazing thing. As a big person that really loves trees, and just to realize how many other people, how people actually really do connect and feel very, very close to trees and to nature.
Yes.
That it's not completely lost.
No, I agree with you about that. And I think it did demonstrate how much love there is felt for trees. And there was a wonderful programme, and I'll link all these bits and pieces in our show notes, Philip, for people. But there was a wonderful programme by an actress called Judi Dench, and it was all about her arboretum, where she plants trees for folks who are no longer in her life, including her husband. And and just her walking through her small arboretum, her woodland, and touching the trees and communicating with them, seeing how much comfort and joy and love she had for them.
It's like walking amongst your friends, isn't it? It's like walking amongst your loved ones, because you remember why you picked that tree for that person. And then seeing it grow and just going, like you say, touching it, even maybe talking to it. I mean, I talk to mine, not always out loud, but just the feeling. And that's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Because it's sort of, it really connects. It feels like you're still connected to that person because it was planted, because they died, but this thing is living. So it's a really strong. The Queen Elizabeth, also David Attenborough, walked around her garden or some part of one. She had many, and the same thing she planted, and she knew every single one.
Yeah.
And I was really, I mean, she was a very impressive woman anyway, but, I just, I could just feel that, that connect to the people that she planted them for, and that, like you say, this was Judi Dench as well. I think and not everybody can plant on arboretum. And I mean, I even plant trees around hotness. We just do like some wild planting, and people don't even realize. The people that I do it with is a charity, and she said, we just put high vis jackets on and nobody asks questions, so we just plant trees.
Well, I love that. It's like stealth tree planting. You're like tree ninjas.
It's called gorilla planting, isn't it? But I mean, they're all these retired ladies, and a lovely charity that just, because there's no money in the pot, in Totnes, or most towns, most probably. And I thought, well, they're all retired, and they just sit at home, and it gets them out. And I've got to know them all. They're such a wonderful, energetic, lovely bunch of ladies. And one of the ladies died, and we decided on a mulberry tree, because then we can all dance around the mulberry tree. There's a poem. There's a poem like that, and it just makes me smile. And every time I drive past, I think of her, and it's a love, and I think everybody else that's in the group will do the same.
Yeah.
And it's just
Yeah.
there in Totnes. It's just there. It's just growing there.
No, it's brilliant.
Nobody even realised we did it. But
So
people liked, and then people like to see trees. So they sort of talking out to Southampton, obviously, but they're just too glad that somebody else is doing their work that they can't get to, and there's no funding for it.
yeah.
So yeah, hopefully we'll have loads of trees around Totnes over time, remembering people and times and places, and so we plant more trees, and that's a good thing for any place, isn't it?
And I think there's so many options. You can certainly have a tree in a pot if you really need it to be like that. If you're in a flat and you've only got like a little bit of a balcony, I think you could put an Acer in a pot, but there probably are more things that
I'm even
grow in
thinking
a
like
pot.
the Cornus Kusa, which is the Korean or Japanese dogwood. Beautiful small tree, very big white. I mean, you're not supposed to call them flowers, but they're white bracts, modified leaves, but they look like flowers. And that's really, so go for something that's really slow growing, quite small. So, you know what I mean? Again, that's something that we could, or, if you go, say, on our website or other websites or whatever, but always look at the eventual size. And if you sort of see the, because sometimes they say, how long it'll take to get to the eventual size. But if the eventual size isn't that big, if it's only about 5-6 meters tall, then that will most probably do quite well in a pot.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as you feed them and obviously water them, because trees and pots don't always, get enough rain or anything like that. So they need a little bit more input from the humans in their life. But it's very possible, yeah. If you just choose carefully, then that's really possible, yeah.
And you can if you have a natural burial ground, many of them will be very happy for you to plant trees there. If you're going down that green funeral kind of route, you can have a tree in your own garden, in your own space. There are often woodlands or arboretums locally who will plant trees for you in memoriam. So there's different ways to
or just put on a high-vis jacket.
Yes, I'll just jacket. Yes, and do some
Sorry, I shouldn't be. No, because sometimes when you ask them, you open a can of worms. I think that's what we realized.
Yeah, no, I can imagine.
But I don't know, but I shouldn't be advocating to plant trees. But yeah, maybe just choose the space carefully, so it's not going to block views or hinder traffic, or we do think very carefully about trees and where they go and what we're going to put there. You can imagine, so the lady from the Totnes group would phone me and we need one here, and then I would be driving past. I said, okay, well, give me a week or two. I'll go drive past the site, and then I'll start thinking, and then all of a sudden the tree will pop into my head. What we can plant there. So because what I'm trying to say is there's definitely a bit of thought process. If you are going to plant trees in open spaces and stuff, just so that it's so that it's not going to outgrow the space, or like I said, be hindered, or very thorny, close to a playground for kids, things like that. You know what I mean?
No, exactly, and poisonous, and I mean some things are not trees often, but poisonous plants. But I know recently, I've got a friend who's a farmer, and one of his neighbours used to walk their dog down the lane all the time. They live in a small cottage and they're older, and she wanted to plant a tree and was talking about it, but was thinking, could she manage it in the cottage garden and her age and what have you. And then eventually they've planted something on the edge of his farmland, because she said, that's where her husband would walk the dog every day, and he would go past that field. And the farmer is really happy to have that tree on the edge of his farmland, because he's rewilding all the time. They're really focused on their hedgerows. And he said, and having a tree there, he said, will be just, not a problem at all.
No, exactly. I mean, most farmers are, people of the land, but yeah, it is a good thing just to check, most probably.
Yes.
Especially when you're out in the countryside. Because in a town, it's a bit more complicated, isn't it? Because, who makes the decisions? Who's ever been voted in or whatever the case is. But when you're out in the countryside, then you're most probably dealing with maybe one owner, so then it's maybe good to just check, unless it's a sort of a public space. So yeah, it's just good, that awareness of where you're planting, and if it's, and again, if it's very exposed, what kind of stuff, so there's, just think about the environment. I mean, I get so many people that come and meant, okay, I want a Japanese maple. And then I ask them, so where are you going to plant? Well, I live on top of a hill. But I've got a beautiful view, they say. And then I go, oh, so it's windy. And they went, oh, how did you know? Well, view comes with wind. No, then you can't have a Japanese maple. But I want one. Okay, well, you can have one, but it's not going to be very happy. It's not going to look great.
Exactly.
Let's get wind burn on the leaves and stuff. So yeah, that's how I always say to people: first, look at your environment where you're going to plant it, and then pick a tree. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed potentially. If you come and go, I want this tree.
Yeah, there's nothing sadder than putting a tree in and it not surviving, actually.
No, exactly, and that's the thing, isn't it? And that's what people saying. The wrong tree in the wrong place, but it's just a bad choice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because trees will sort of grow or maybe too well. I think that's most probably when people refer to this, is when they grow too well and they become too big for the space. But that wasn't thought out. I mean, I actually stopped. Somebody was outside the garden. I wanted to knock on their door, but I've been driving past them many times, and they planted a Christmas tree in their front garden, tiny little front garden. And they were in the garden the other day, and I stopped. I said, "Do you know how big this is going to grow?" And they went, "No, but it's only a Christmas tree." I went, "No, they grow into the biggest trees in Europe. If you go into the mountains in the Alps, they grow like to 40 meters high." And you could just see them going, "Oh my word!"
Whoops.
So it's you get a lot of these things at some supermarkets. I won't name names, but that sell these little glow in the dark green sort of Leylandii looking things, and they make them look really pretty and small in tiny little pots, but they grow absolutely massive. And people say, "Oh, but they were only small." And go, well, it's like making only a little small fire and the whole house burns down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, well, exactly. And it's that thinking ahead thing. And that's why it's great to have a chat with a tree expert. And, I imagine that you'd be really happy to take calls from people and have people get in touch and talk about their tree needs, so to speak. And there is something very comforting about being able to go and visit something. I've noticed, and a lot of crematoriums would say this, that a certain generation of people will always go to the grave and leave flowers. But if you walk around a lot of crematoriums and graveyards, there are very few visitors there. We do not tend to go to those places and look at a gravestone. It's not really, the modern way of remembering our person. It's becoming less and less. And they feel like very historic places sometimes. So, having a tree and just even having the closeness of the thought of your person. So, the fact that I sit in my garden and have a cup of tea and I can think about my mum and my mum-in-law because, I feel their presence there it brings a closeness and it brings it into your life. And I think about death is not ever very distant from our lives, because the minute you've experienced death, you've experienced grief, and that's never going to leave your life. It just becomes more manageable in some way. So trees, I think, have a certain magic about them in giving you a focus for a conversation or just even a moment of memory.
And it's also, it's a lovely way of continuing that person's memory. I think we sort of spoke a little bit about it before, but that's, I think, what this is all about, isn't it? It's the thought of that person, and if a little bit of thought had gone into the variety, then that tree will mean that little bit more, and then seeing it develop and change and visiting it and maybe watering it the first year or two or whatever is is a wonderful way of keeping the memory of that person alive. And I think, that's it's like this friend of mine that died of breast cancer. Their kids were quite small. I've just been on holiday with them. And I said to the husband, I'm gonna talk about her all the time, if you don't mind. And he says, no, 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 please don't. And I talk about this tree and that I go and visit and talk to her, and they love it.
Yeah.
Because so many people want to almost, especially with kids. It's like, oh, should we talk about it? No, because it's wonderful to keep the memory alive of that person, and they love it. They come and sit right next to me and they listen to the stories that I tell about her, and how naughty we were and how much fun we had.
No, that's really
and just because it keeps that memory alive, and I think that's exactly what trees do as well.
Yeah.
Because they keep growing, and if there was some kind of thought that went into that tree and that person, then that would make it just that little bit more special.
I agree. And I mean, this is a sort of sensitivity warning for our listeners, but I think if you have ever lost a child, then it's particularly helpful to think about trees. Because although that child might not have been old enough to have developed its own character, especially if it's lost, in the early part of pregnancy or, immediately afterwards, but any loss of a child is such a heartfelt loss of everything, dreams and wishes and the future that you felt was probably ahead. And so there's something about allowing yourself space to talk about that. And I think trees are really helpful in those kind of situations because it allows the family to choose a tree that they think their child might have been like.
Yeah, exactly. Also about how that parent feels about, say something really pretty like a crab apple that's got these beautiful blossoms in springtime, and I mean nobody cannot love that, and and then these beautiful crab apples at the end of the season, and and you can even then make some crab apple jelly and make that into like a celebration as well, and something like that gives well. Even if the child didn't have a personality yet, but then it becomes more about what the parents are going through. That's in a way, and what they, like you say, what they wanted maybe for that child, or how it makes them feel. Then that's the memory or the feeling that can then
and great for siblings
too.
as well. Even the siblings who come afterwards, say if loss of a child was a one of your first potential children, then siblings who come afterwards, that helps to explain that. We had a child. That child didn't live, but we planted this tree, and this is where we come to remember them. And I think it's so helpful in the cycle of life and death and all the conversations we probably should have more openly as a society to help each other cope with all this stuff. I think it just makes it.
And also, I think for the other children to come along to know that that child isn't just forgotten, that child is still part of the family. That's really important. I think for just for the whole family to deal with, and to remember that person by like you're saying, we've got these crematoriums and that people don't visit, or graveyards that a lot of people, I know, a lot of people don't like graveyards either, because they're quite intense, isn't it? Where a tree can be anywhere. If it's in your garden or if it's in a space that you go walking or whatever, then it doesn't feel like you going to a grave. I don't want to put graveyard down, but it's like, that's quite like we're going to the graveyard now. It's just a walk. Oh, and there's the tree.
Yeah,
it's a lighter feeling, and
it does.
And it's not so
life. Yeah.
So such an intense experience, I assume.
And, there are things that I think of the potential of, like if a tree was in blossom, or even maybe not, you could take a few branches and you could put them in a bouquet for a wedding. So if you had a tree that was, grandma's tree, and the granddaughter wanted to feel her presence at her wedding or a ceremony like that, you could certainly.
Yeah, it's a really good idea. Really good idea. I mean,
take parts of the tree.
Yeah, I mean, you can make wreaths with anything now. I mean, there's people, all kinds of hedgerow plants and stuff. Anything with texture or leaves or anything like that can be added into a bouquet. So yeah, that's a really good idea, isn't it, as well? Because then that person is sort of then part of future ceremonies. And yeah, that's a very lovely thought. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
So is there anything else? We've had a great conversation about trees. Thank you, Philip.
No,
so
not a
much
problem.
about them.
I've really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. So we'll obviously put all your details in the show notes so people can find their way to you. I know you've got an Instagram and you've got your website as well, but anywhere else you think people can go and find out more. Is there anything that you want to tell us about trees before we end our podcast chat?
Don't get me started.
I know you love them so much, so I thought I'd just give you a chance.
No, you're putting me on the spot. No, I just want to sort of maybe recap and say that, in this context of this podcast and, of memorial trees and remembrance trees, I can't think of anything better to do. And maybe I'm a little bit biased because I love trees so much, and it comes so naturally to me to just plant trees all the time. It makes me really exciting in a way that people might be planting more trees, and it might make their grieving process a bit easier and more tolerable. And if you put a bit of time and effort into picking something that reminded you of that person, then that tree will be so much more memorable and special in your life. So I hope everybody enjoyed listening to this and maybe plant some trees.
I couldn't say it any better. Thank you everyone for listening. It's been a pleasure to have you alongside, Philip, and we'll see you all soon, listeners. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Good Goobyes, the Funeral Facts podcast. Please do like, subscribe, comment and share. Drop any questions on our social media, on Instagram, or in the text option in the show notes.
Si and I are qualified professionals, but we always advise our clients to seek any additional support from medical practitioners if they need to. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay well and be kind to one another.